Hi, Simon, and thank you for having the time to have a short introduction and an interview regarding the green transition and your opinions.
Hello, Anthony. Lovely to be with you.
Good. So, people that are watching, could you give a short introduction of who you are, what you do, and what are you passionate about?
Okay. Simon Michaux. I am an Associate Professor of the Geological Survey of Finland in the Circular Economy Solutions Unit. I have, basic training, physics and geology in applied science. And then I did some mining geology and open pit optimization and geostatistics. And then a Ph.D. in mining engineering, explosives. I then joined the mining industry, research and development for 18 years in geometallurgy. And I joined the private sector in the mining industry, supporting feasibility studies. I then left Australia and I'm from the Australian mining industry. So I left Australia in 2015 to learn, to come to Europe, to learn industrial recycling and the circular economy. I was there for 3 years in the University of Liège. And then I came to Finland to do mineral intelligence. And since then, I've been promoted to my current position, and I'm now attached to a pilot process plant run by GTK. I'm operating on 4 fronts. One is geometallurgy, the handshake between geology and mineral processing. 2 is digitization of our process plant. 3 is reinventing the circular economy into something that might work. And 4 is a mineral intelligence outcome, which is what we're talking about today, was looking at the green transition. If we were to go off and phase out fossil fuels, what would that look like and what's required? So for the last 5 years, I've looked at that specifically. If we were to phase out fossil fuels, and so it's no more chit chat, we're now going to do it. And if I assembled all the non-fossil fuel systems I could get for the time, and I mapped the calendar year of 2018 to actually do this. And so I worked out how much of physical units that we would actually need and how we'll be using them. What I have found is the task of, like, we're still hopelessly dependent on fossil fuels. Hopelessly, and it's all the work that we've done to bring in renewable technology for the last 10, 15 years is actually less in capacity than the expansion of the fossil fuel systems under it. So we have yet to actually phase out anything. We're using more oil, gas, and coal than ever. Right, so the task is much larger than we thought. Now, that's 2 things. So it's going to take time to produce all these things. So there's time, there's money, who's going to pay for all this? Then there is where do things get constructed? Like most of it, our manufacturing happens in Southeast Asia, China in particular, not in Europe. Do they have the capacity to produce such a large number of renewable technology units? The answer is no. We want so many things in, and we have set ourselves a target to do all this by 2050. The IEA says by 2050 we'll be pretty much there. Right, so that's 26 years away, or 26 years in a couple of weeks. And so we don't have a lot of time. Then the question became, well, where do we get the raw materials from? Now, I'm part of the Circular Economy Solutions Unit, and so recycling is considered very important. In fact, we would like to get most of our raw materials from recycling if we could. That's a can of worms. As it turns out, that's not going to happen for 2 reasons that have nothing to do with recycling technology. One, we're not designing things to be recycled, which means it's very, very hard to get anything, the efficient recycling out. And 2, our society is not geared for the collection of waste streams where things can be recycled efficiently. For example, most mobile phones, like, here's my mobile phone. Most mobile phones, when they wear out, they're not actually sort of handed into recycling. People put them in a drawer. 95% of mobile phones that are old and out of use now are in a drawer somewhere. So, all right, so recycling, while will be strategically important, the amount of metals we need is huge, much more than recycling can actually deliver. The other problem is the metals that we want are relatively exotic, like lithium and cobalt, and vanadium and what have you. And we do mine these things now, but not in quantities like this. So there's not enough metals, exotic metals, in the system now that can be recycled. So this is a mining story. For at least the first generation of technology, at least, is mining. And the next piece of work was to look at the volume of metal we would need to replace things, like 100% replacement, which will be done in the next 26 years, apparently, right? And put that up against the mining industry's ability to deliver that. And what I found is existing mining production will not be able to meet that demand. And so now we've got to have the idea of open more mines. Can we open more mines? Well, yes, but it takes between 15 and 20 years to open a mine. Right, so even with the deposit we know is there and everything's right, this is what the incubation cycle is. So that's not going to be easy. So then we go, so well, is there enough mineral reserves? And turns out, no, not even close. Now, a mineral reserve is a patch of mineralized rock in the ground that's economically feasible to extract. We've actually looked at it and said, yes, this is viable, we can do it. A mineral resource is a patch of ground that's got mineralization that's slightly above background mineralization. But we don't know what's in it yet. We don't really know much about it. And it could be minerals that are too deep for us to mine, or it could be such low grade, or the metal is so small that it's actually beyond their technology to grind that fine. So just because it's a resource doesn't mean we can access it. A mineral reserve is usually associated with a feasibility study of some kind, like a pre-feas. A mineral resource is an exploration outcome report where they don't know the true size or the true character of the resource. But the question is, if we did include all resources, are they useful? And it turns out, no, the quantity of metal is so large that mineral reserves plus resources is still not enough. And then there was a question, well, what about the seafloor? We haven't really done much with that. And so, well, yes, there's lots down there, but the resources that we know of, when you include them, is still not enough. So all the metals that we know on, like say for copper on planet Earth, is not enough, not even close to being enough, to manufacture the first generation of renewable technology to replace what we have to phase out fossil fuels now. And so the outcome is we have got to, all right, all stop. Okay, we now need to be sensible about this and go back to the drawing board and have an honest and adult discussion about the challenges that we have and then what might we do about them. And that's the work that's been happening for the last 5, and that's where we are now. And we're starting to have that conversation with people like you.
Yeah, it's just really hard to phase out everything that you just said. So basically, when I read news and there's all the time like new resources found underground, new minerals, we have unlimited supply. So I shouldn't be cheering that there's going to be minerals for everyone, and we shouldn't be worried about that. So is it like
mining the seafloor? We shouldn't do that. The environmental impact would be disastrous.
And was it like that if I want to set up a mine, it might take like 20 to 25 years? Or
yeah, it's about 7 or 8 years to go from a resource to a reserve. We've got like a feasibility study, and it's been accepted and authorized by things like a JORC code. Then on top of that, once you've got your mineral reserve, it's about 15 to 20 years to take a deposit of the feasibility study to a producing mine. About 15 to 20 years. So you've got an incubation time of around 20, 25 years to do a single mine. And for every 10 mines, or for every 1,000 deposits we discover, only 1 or 2 become mines because of the problems and challenges the mining industry face. And then you've got, for every 10 mines that are operating, we'll lose 2 or 3 to market conditions because they're just, they're trying to make money to survive. And market conditions have changed and they're no longer viable and they shut down. So the idea that the mining industry can expand quickly does not actually sort of reflect the challenges they face. Now, where we are at the moment, there's actually for example. You need about $4 billion to actually invest in a mine in South America for copper, because the size of these things is huge before you can actually make any money. Raising that capital has been very difficult for the last 15 years in particular, because the deposits are getting bigger and bigger, the operations are getting bigger, which means it's taking longer. You've got to put more money up front, so bigger risk. It's taking longer to get that money back, and the returns are getting narrower and narrower. And there's now a high percentage of a chance we will lose money. And so investors are reluctant to put their money in copper mining. So it's not that we've run out of copper, we've run out of capability to produce that copper because we've run out of money, capital. Right, so there are now supply shortfalls from the copper industry projected right now. Yet we want to electrify everything, which will involve a lot of copper. So the mining industry is already showing signs of stress in the existing business model, and it suggests we are evolving to a different business model, which will involve more stress.
And we need copper also for all the cables and all the infrastructures. So
anything electrical will have copper.
Yeah. So is there, and then I remember like previously you was also, what about these, I remember you talking about these wind power and wind turbines.
Yep.
So aren't that an option also?
So what we call renewable power, like wind and solar in particular, has been flagged by the IEA to be the next primary energy generation source, which is like 70-75% of the primary energy mix will come from wind and solar. Problem with both of these is they're highly intermittent. Now, our electronics needs pretty stable electrical power. It's what we call sinusoidal clean power with no spikes in it, no brownouts, no blackouts. It's got to be the same voltage, same currency, and same frequency in a very narrow window to a resolution of a millionth of a second. And if we don't have that 24/7, but when we actually have fluctuations, this is where we get blackouts and brownouts, and power spikes, which can destroy computers or delicate electronics. So we need stable power. That's on the demand side. On the supply side, wind is highly variable, and so it fluctuates with these massive peaks, and those peaks can be sometimes 60% in capacity in the swing peaks. So you can have like days at a time when there's very little wind and it's not enough for and you often see wind turbines are not turning at all because the wind's not strong enough to make them turn, right? And so that can go for a couple of days. And then you have times when the wind's blowing really hard and you get this massive peak. So the power production from wind is often really, really choppy and it swings all over the place. That has to be smoothed out into a flat line. Now, the way we do it at the moment is all power systems are balanced off against each other. Like the wind power, for example, in Denmark, is balanced off power coming from Sweden and Germany, usually fossil fuel based, like gas in particular. Right, and that's just, and if we need more power to actually balance things up, we just buy more and burn more fossil fuels. If you have a power system that's now so large, let's say wind represents 38% of the primary energy mix, that's a lot. And we're not going to balance that off against something else, so it has to be internally self-sufficient, which means we've got to have a buffer, a power buffer to actually sort of transfer power from. Where do we get that? Now, at the moment, pumped hydro, what's called pumped hydro, is how we store large amounts of power most of the time. We've got a hydroelectric system on a river, and above the river is in another, at a higher altitude, there is a group, that there's a reservoir of water where water can be pumped in off-peak, like at night, and then during the day at peak production, it comes back down the hill and generates electrical power, and that's how we store the electricity. We can actually do that in the scale that we've got at the moment. But if we were to actually force the issue to store the amount of power we would need to supply for wind and solar is also all intermittent as well. We're going to need it will tie up much more fresh water and most of these sites are away from the sea, so it will be fresh water, then the planetary environment can sustain. Getting at here is the storage of so much power. So pumped hydro can't do it. The calculations of stored hydrogen also show that hydrogen can't do it because of the energy efficiency involved of hydrogen. Hydrogen is an energy carrier, not an energy source. You've got to make it. So if you were to, let's say we're now going to store hydrogen for, power storage, we've got to deliver a certain amount of power to the grid to smooth out wind and solar, the amount of time. And the amount of time is actually much larger than we think too. Existing thinking thinks that we only need 5 to 7 hours. And that's okay for the day-to-day differences between peak and trough supply and demand. But that doesn't help us with seasonal variations. Like, the difference between summer and winter for solar radiance is enormous. That has to be smoothed out, right? And so there is 4 references I use. One's 5 to 7 hours, which is what everyone's put their hat on. Another one's 48 hours, which is an old study. One's 28 days, 4 weeks, which I picked because I thought was a conservative outcome. But the 4th one, which I think is actually close to the real answer, is 12 weeks. 12 weeks buffer storage. And the reason we get that is when you actually look at, for solar, the difference between wind and winter and summer is enormous. Where you've got to collect power, store it for about 6 months, and then release it slowly over a time period, and so till it comes back up into line. And 12 weeks looks like about the right amount for that. For wind, the problem with wind is when you have like a weather event where you have low wind, and weather every now and then. Like when I was in Australia in 2013, it rained for 8 weeks straight, and it was under heavy overcast cloud. The solar panels on the roof didn't produce power at all for 8 weeks. So these things happen every now and then. The problem is with these weather events is you get more than one. You can get like a short one, say a couple of days, but then a couple of days later you get another one, and a couple of days you get another one. Right, but the grid has to recover from each event. So if you get like a string of bad weather events, right, and looking at the data, they use the data in Germany because it's the best available. But there are other data sets that show essentially the same thing, where how long does the power buffer have to be to recover, for the grid to recover from, say, a string of unseasonal bad weather events that do happen every now and then? And the answer they came to was 12 weeks. Right. So, and we've actually this hasn't been a problem so far because we burn fossil fuels, which can happen at any time. But now we are susceptible to the weather. And according to climate change metrics, that weather is about to get more volatile. Right. So this is the problem. And so how do we store that power? And so back to hydrogen. For every kilogram of hydrogen we have, we put it through a PEM cell, we get 15 kilowatt hours of electrical power. To produce that hydrogen, I use the number 50 kilowatt hours, but the number at the moment is close to 53, 54. But let's say 50 kilowatt hours. Then you've got that hydrogen, you've got to compress it into a tank. That's 2.5 kilowatt hours. So let's say 52.5 kilowatt hours to produce a single kilogram of hydrogen, but we get 15 out. That's a round trip efficiency of 28%. So if we actually have a known amount of power that we've got to deliver to the grid, how much hydrogen do we need to make and then store? And the numbers are enormous. We don't have the technology to store such a large amount of hydrogen yet. Hydrogen's a very small molecule, so whatever containment system you put it in, it tends to pass through the walls and membranes of all sorts of things, and it makes everything brittle in doing so, which is why you have lots of leaks. Now, we know how to store hydrogen on a relatively small volume now, but scaling up to these quantities we don't seem to understand. No, we don't have the technology to do it. So anyway, so pumped hydro can't do it. Stored hydrogen can't, and even if you did make enough hydrogen, the power grid would have to expand between 27 and 80% in capacity on top of my calculations to generate the power to produce the hydrogen to deliver the buffer. Now, because wind and solar represent 70% of that power grid to start with, a massive chunk of that is wind and solar, which will need another buffer again. And so you're in this hall of mirrors. How do you do this? Unless you force the issue and have that buffer made from power systems like nuclear or geothermal, but that puts pressure on those systems that were tasked to other things. And so what you end up with is an enormous amount of trouble and work for a very, very small outcome. Right. And so hydrogen can't do it. And so my work was then to step in and show if we did this with battery banks, what would that look like? And the reason I did that is every government I have spoken to believes their power storage requirements are going to be addressed with battery banks. That's what they think. But they also think they only need 5 to 7 hours, not between 4 to 12 weeks. That's the problem. Right, so the answer is battery bank can't do it either. Now, the only other options we had on the table were at the time were spinning flywheels and compressed air. Now, both of those systems work and they have their place. All systems work and they all have their place. The question is, can we scale them up? That's when the trouble starts. Both of those systems have engineering scale-up issues at the moment. So now we're trying to actually sort of bring new innovations, like can we use liquid fuels? And again, it's all very new. We don't know if this stuff's going to work because we haven't done it yet. Right. So this is the adult conversation. What we think we're going to do, and what actually sort of come. At the moment, wind and solar are not viable as the primary power systems to replace fossil fuels. And what's driving that is the need for the power buffer and the size of that power buffer. Until we address that, it's not viable.
Wow. So we have like European Union has the Fit for 55. We have the Paris Agreement. Do you think that we're on the way now for the next like 20 until 2030? We're on the right path, but we should really do something else after that. And
So we're on the right path in context of we understand that fossil fuels are going and we've got to get rid of them. Right. That in its own right was quite a paradigm shift. The plan to actually sort of be renewable by 2030 or 2050, these are all been made on ideology. You know, politicians saying we will do this without understanding how to do that has not even been thought through at all. Every single plan I've seen for the phasing out of fossil fuels, especially by 2030 or 2050, in my opinion, is delusional because they haven't actually looked at the practicalities. There's no feasibility plan for industrial reform that I have seen that actually gets to the point where it discusses, right, we will now have this amount of installed power in these regions that's not fossil fuel. And this is the infrastructure we need to do that. So far, they're saying, oh, they'll talk in terms of percentages. We'll be 80% renewable, 30. The people who make those statements are not actually talking to people who actually will work out the logistics involved with that to the point where they're responsible for the outcome. They're making stuff up. They're pulling numbers out of the air. So ideology is fine in its own right, but what we must do is the next step is to check it out, run some numbers and check them against reality. That step has not been done yet.
So that's unbelievable. But why haven't we done it?
Because we haven't had to. For the last 100 years, energy's been abundant, money's been abundant, and natural resources have all been abundant. And if we want stuff, we can just make it up. But we haven't had to balance our budgets at a nation state level for 50 years. If we want more money, we just print more money. And every nation state around the world is doing that. So that thinking, and the phrase, the market will fix it. We're abdicating responsibility for planning for the future by making such statements. But that's how we've operated. So we've never had to think in these terms before, therefore we don't. No, we don't.
Is there a single country that their grid could like take this? Like, are all the countries like unprepared?
So every country has a list of pros and cons. Some things are good, some things are not good. For example, I'm in Finland, and I think you're in Sweden. So we need
We're in Finland.
Oh, God, you're in Finland too. Good one. So we need electrical power to heat buildings to survive. Right, we don't need to do that in, say, New Guinea or in Africa. It's just not cold. So we've got major requirements for society to function that are energy based. Right. So what I'm sort of saying there is every nation state around us has different challenges. I would say all nation states at some level at a policy preparedness, at like a strategic policy development, like the people who plan for non-linear disaster events, senior civil servants who they're not making open plans out of public space. But if, for example, Finland got hit with a disaster, what do we do? Those people, I think, are making plans because they understand quite well the predicament that we're in. But the outcomes of such a plans are very politically sensitive. No politician is going to get re-elected by bringing up these issues because no one wants to hear that the future will involve more work for less outcome. Right? Yeah, that's just the way we are. We don't look at these things.
Yeah. What about we have a lot of sustainability is a large trend, and we have a lot of like experts that are talking about promoting electricity. Is there things that you've seen that sustainability specialists haven't really realized? What should they focus on?
So what we call the sustainability experts is vulnerable to almost every other technical aspect, where we believe I'm from the Australian mining industry, the commodities industry. We don't do much mining in Europe because we think it's beneath us. But we prefer to buy things, finished products off the market. Right. So the environmental activists trying to shut down a mine will quite happily buy a computer made in China with mineral resources extracted from Australia. Right. And that's they don't see the hypocrisy in that at all.
Yeah.
The commodities industry has been misunderstood, is what I'm getting at. We extract raw materials and we use them on a day-to-day basis all over the world, even here. So most people, for example, believe all innovations are market-driven. Price will go up, someone will think of something, and all commodities will magically appear. Now, that's the way things have been for the last century. We have now got we are now underpinned by the energy systems, oil in particular, cannot actually do that anymore. This is the problem. Yeah.
So what can I do as a person, an individual, and what can I do if I was like a company? What should I focus on? Just go with the rules?
Okay, so this is actually quite a tough question because to actually get any sort of action out of this at all the solutions involve a fundamental reconstruction of everything at such a fundamental level, we can't get our arms around this. So many things have to change at the same time. At an individual level, well, I suppose at both levels, the first step is to truly understand what we're looking at and the nature of what we're looking at. Most people don't want to do that because it's scary. And
where should they look? What should they look?
So first is energy. Where do we get our energy from and where do we get our raw materials from? And understand that the global just-in-time supply grid is now going to evolve into something else more regional. So we have to understand why that is. The answers to your question is understand and then build culture. That sounds very abstract. What do you mean? First of all, understand what you're looking at and understand that there are solutions if you choose to look at them, but those solutions are unorthodox and they've been previously rejected. Our energy systems have to evolve. That is clear, but to evolve into what? At the same time, our society has to contract its footprint in terms of how much raw materials it consumes, where it consumes them, how it consumes them, and what it does with the waste streams. So a fundamental reinvention, but energy is at the core. The one energy system I'm looking at that seems to be very interesting is liquid fuel fission. So this is an evolution of the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry in its current form can't help us. It can't expand fast enough, and it's way too complex to be the primary energy system. And we don't have the technical capacity to manage such a large system in its current form. So if the nuclear industry was to evolve into something else, that might work. Liquid fuel means the fuel is liquid as it passes around the actual circuit, which means it takes a different form and it's run differently. The fuel I like to look at is thorium, because the front end and the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle is much smaller and has much less risk and is much easier to manage. But we could just as easily use uranium in liquid fuel, and there's some liquid metals that are actually possible as well. There's also the possibility of making smaller reactors. What that means is, instead of having like a massive, humongous nuclear reactor and then we send power out all over the countryside, every industrial site could have a small thorium burner under it, which means we dispense with the need of the transport grid, the grid between them. So not only do we not need the buffer, we've decentralized the power system and we've reduced our material consumption enormously by doing that one step. It turns out there's a group called Copenhagen Atomic that are actually seriously doing this. And so Sweden and Norway will probably lead the world in terms of these power systems that are being developed and are coming out. That will change things to the point where it's actually feasible and possible. So that's the first step. The second step is to look at, there's groups like the Club of Rome that's been trying to get us to look at the idea of degrowth. And no one wants to hear that, because our current economic model is based on growth, profit, and consumption and materialism, because it makes everyone rich and gives everyone a dopamine hit. All of it's going to be scrapped and replaced with something else. We have to make do with less. Life has to become simpler, and we have to value things differently. So human society now needs a different relationship with the environment, with energy, and with resources. All of it changes.
Impossible.
No, it's not. No, it's not, because it sounds like a lot there, but what we're doing is making one change, one. And that change is, how does society see itself? And that one change has a knock-on effect to do everything else. And so that comes down to build culture.
But do we need everyone to realize, to make our goals true? Do we need all the countries?
So I found that, well, if we did all countries, then it'd be so much easier. But I don't know about you, but I found that you can't get agreement on any of this stuff at all. And so what I found is, instead of trying to put a solution on the ground for 8 billion people, we're going to fix it for everyone. What if we did things where, well, let's have a diversity of solutions. Everyone's got an idea, give it a go, and we'll see who prospers. So you start small. For example, let's look, can we do these solutions in a single town or in a single city? And everyone else will become very, very aware of what works and what doesn't. And if these ideas work and we tell everyone, lots of people will say, hey, that works. Because the existing system will break down and all existing plans in response will break down. And so we will see problem solving like you've never seen before, and innovation, and people will exchange information, what works and what doesn't. So no, we don't need everyone to agree, right? What we do need everyone is to see.
So how can we get people to start brainstorming the ideas?
Well, frankly, what you're doing now is actually very useful, Because what we're talking about is to get people to understand what they're looking at, get them to change their thinking. They will then find like-minded people, whether it's on the internet or in their own community, and they'll start to discuss things. And the more they discuss, the more doors that start to open, and they will realize they will need certain things, whether it's information or whether it's actually equipment or access to certain people. They will go and find it. So this interview now, and things like it, like there's lots of things like it now on the internet now. This will actually then come to the point where it will set off a chain reaction.
So what about if I'm a company, I want to make a lot of money, I want to be sustainable also. Do you think that the companies that are really pursuing the sustainability goals will prosper the most into the future, that are open-minded?
Well, it depends on what they are. See, what we call sustainability doesn't include all the things that we need to include. Like in any of the sustainability goals, they have not linked at the heart of everything natural resources and where we get them from, or the embedded energy in getting those resources, or the complexity of manufacturing any of the stuff we use. So we're going to see a radical.
I don't need to be aware of that. I have the EU regulations, and they say that this is zero emissions. So
sure. Great.
Why should I think differently?
Then when things don't work anymore. So you either, when things don't work, when the orthodox methods don't work, you either turn to the unorthodox or you accept failure. We are in a world at the moment where we can't discuss things openly, where things like the stove is hot. And we said, well, don't touch the stove then. But now we're in a world where that's fake news, or the market told me different. All right, put your lower lip on the stove, tell me how it goes. That's now the environment we're in. We're going to learn the hard way. Now, so all these companies that are actually going after sustainability goals, I approve in what they're trying to do, but everyone I've come across so far is depending upon things that are not sustainable. Like, most of the green transition is dependent on fossil fuels to work, even after it's constructed.
So a lot of people will be really disagreeing with you.
Sure.
So could you give them a challenge to prove you wrong, or?
Okay, so yeah, so people disagree with me all the time, and that's okay. We've got to be in a world where people can express their opinions and people can disagree with them, and that's okay. Whereas at the moment, most discussions are very tribal and they're conquest based. I've got to be right and you've got to be wrong, otherwise I can't sleep at night. That's not helpful. So I'm quite okay with if people disagree with me. I'm also okay if someone can prove me wrong, because then I'll sleep at night. See how that works? Right. So the challenges that I would give to them is, if you were to phase out fossil fuels completely, and I'm talking at a nation state level, how would you do that? The technical, how many physical units are on the ground? Like this is for a complete replacement. How many electric cars are we talking about? How many trucks? What physical resources come into your country through shipping and through trucking and rail, and where's all this stuff come from? If you were to replace that with fossil fuels, how would you do it? How many? This is the question. How many such units are we talking about? And if you weren't to use fossil fuels anymore, how would you resource them another way? And then the question after that is, take all that all the way to natural resources, or where we got stuff from. Can you get that equation to balance? Because usually what happens is people say, oh, someone told me something different. That person says, oh, the market will sort it out, and that's all we need to know. So instead of actually abdicating responsibility to someone else does the thinking for us, what if we did the thinking ourselves? What would that look like? So here we are. Things like people who want to refute me, for example, on the size of the buffer for wind and solar. Can someone refute the fact that the sun in summer is indeed stronger than the sun in winter. Is that really the case? Or have I got that wrong? Asking for a friend.
Yeah, pure silence on my behalf.
But there, so it's not to be rude, and I don't like this idea of aggressive debate. Like the ancient Greeks had the idea of in a debate, everyone who took part learned something. Whereas a debate at the moment is I'm right and I'm going to make you wrong and I'm going to make you pay for being wrong in that discussion. That seems to be the modern world at the moment. We've got to get away from that, right? And so when I actually sort of put these ideas out there are responses and there are solutions to this, right? And so for example, people will often say you're denying climate change. No. Or you're denying the green transition. And so no, we need to do the green transition. And in fact, the only technologies we've got on the books at the moment are solar panels and wind turbines. Right, so we will do this. It's just going to be an entirely different proposition to what we think. And we'll very quickly have to evolve the system behind that as fast as we can. So yeah.
So shortly, like we need to be less egoistic, we need to be transparent, we need to be open-minded, talk with each other, give ideas, and just be realistic about it and be,
Yeah. So everything you just said in a nutshell is what we must do, right? And why is that so hard to say that? Followed by what we say and do has to be matched with reality. And that is not the case for most of what we're doing.
Because it's hard to find the reality, like to find the information for the reality. Cool.
So and what information are we talking about and what information do we need? Blah, 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 blah. At the moment, we've allowed other people to do our thinking for them and they're giving us pat answers. Almost like memes on the internet. That's what we're basing our debates on, which is why when you debate someone, you often hear the same words again and again and again. We're not thinking. When we interact, are we thinking? Are we really in open dialogue, or are we waiting for our turn to speak?
We want to be right, of course.
Yeah.
I want to sound smart. It's natural.
Yeah.
I've lost that game a long way ago.
Right. So this is an environment for me personally that if someone was to prove me wrong, I'd be deliriously happy because the implications of the future world I would live in. So, yeah.
Cool. Is there anything else you would like to add before we quit?
Yes. So we are often encouraged to look at the challenge side of things. Society is doomed. We're done. We're finished. I like to think in other terms. There are solutions on the table that we can look at if we choose to. If we choose to. If we don't choose to, if it doesn't happen, what I'm getting at is we've got to look at this with open hearts and open minds with regards to problem solving, and we've got to understand that the person next to you is actually your solution, not your enemy. So don't get tied up in the despair. Look at the problem in terms of it's a problem to be solved, and while it's a big problem, it can be solved. And be the person having that idea. Don't wait for someone else to do it, because if we all do that, nothing happens. So look to the future with a more positive attitude, with the understanding of the challenges before us. We're not talking denial, right? But understanding it, and human innovation is a wonderful thing, but at the moment we are refusing to do the thinking and we are abdicating responsibility to others in the hope it will work out. We've got to step up and take the challenge. That's what I would encourage people to think in terms of.
Wow. That sounded great. We need to like lower our barriers and for the greater cause. So
yeah. It's almost like the same conversation of giving away power. By allowing someone else to speak and thinking about their ideas to change my opinions, I'm somehow ceding power to them. Are we? Well, we think we are. It's almost an allegory of Plato's cave. We've got to get out of Plato's cave and see things for ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, it's really hard because we just want to live day by day and we just think about tomorrow and somebody will take care of us.
Yeah,
right?
that we've got to get out of that thinking for a start. We've got to take care of us or it don't happen. Which is why we actually watch what everyone else is doing to see what works and what doesn't work and what can we learn from that.
Let's spread the love and keep being open-minded and really transparent. I just want to say deeply thank you for having this interview, Simon. This has been so eye-opening, and I hope if there's any questions the audience can ask you or me.
Certainly can.
And
certainly can.
Thank you.
Okay. See you guys.
Bye.